State Senator Dawn Euer. Hard to believe it, but other than a live event we just did at the Avon Cinema, this is your first time on Bartholomew Town. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me on. I can't believe it's my first time either.
Yeah, it's shocking, but you know what? You're out there doing the work, so you got got better things to do than come on here. What are you seeing right now as this session wraps up? It's a unique session. Changes certainly in the lower chamber with Speaker Shikarchi becoming, so to speak, just a representative. Leadership changes there. You're also in the first full year of leadership change at the Senate. What are the big
Yep.
takeaways this year?
I think the big takeaway, there's a lot when there's those types of leadership changes to kind of see how things are going to settle. See how decisions are going to be made, how information is going to flow. And so I think that there's really been a shift in an approach and how that all flows on the Senate side, and obviously kind of thrown in the mix on the House side with that very recent leadership change. But, I think my colleagues in government as well as the advocates are trying to kind of figure that out right now.
Right. What has that led to in terms of just a camaraderie change or just the sort of the behind the scenes ebb and flow of how legislation actually comes to life? Has that changed at all in at least on the Senate side from over the last year and a half?
Yeah, I mean, I think there certainly has been, not surprisingly, some tensions that need to continue to get ironed out. But I think it's like anywhere else, right? Like it's a workplace, and you go to work every day, and other people chose who's working with you, and at the end of the day, you're trying to get your job done. And so I think really, I know a lot of my colleagues are really focused on that, and they have different opinions on, legislation or policy ideas that I may have. But, being able to kind of talk those things through, I think continues to be really key and really important. But yeah, it's kind of like any other workplace in that way.
You're well known for your work on the Act on Climate, and we're in a moment right now where, to me anyway, it feels like climate has become, in some circles, I don't even think a top five issue in some people's
Mhm.
minds, where at the same time, we may be talking about the survival of the species. Where's climate legislation
Yeah.
and climate related activity right now, at least from your standpoint in the Senate?
Yeah, I think for me this year was a big defense year. It was as you said, I think the conversation has shifted, and I think a lot of folks are really focused on the affordability conversation. To me, those things go hand in hand, and as I've worked on climate legislation and specifically on energy policy, I have always focused on that intersection of how do we build an economy, and how do we build a future that works for everyday Rhode Islanders, for everyday Americans? And I think in order to do that, we need to tackle climate, and affordability needs to be integrated in every conversation we're having around policy.
Yeah, there's an intersection that's kind of not, maybe not uniquely Rhode Island, but it's an important Rhode Island discussion, which is affordability, housing, development, but where? And when we look right now at the delicate ecosystems, not not talking about the delicate mental ecosystems of towns like Johnston that decide they don't want to have affordable housing, but
Right.
the actual landscape of Rhode Island. How do we strike a balance going into the next 100 years of a maybe stagnant population, but one that certainly needs housing and at some point is likely to grow in one way, shape, or form? I mean, where do we build?
Yeah, I mean, I'm somebody who thinks that building is only part of the conversation, because we also have a bunch of dark homes. I mean, I live in and represent a coastal community, and there's so many homes that used to be year-round residents for families, year-round residents, even for renters, that are now treated as second, third, even fourth homes for the uber wealthy who want to call Rhode Island, their second home or third home. So I think that I do think that building is part of it, and I think you raise a very good point. We need to be smart about that. I mean, for example, I voted against some of the housing legislation that would allow builders to encroach on wetlands, because we don't want to build We know enough, right? We know enough science, we know enough about policy, we know what the smart decisions are, and I think we can make smart decisions about how and where we're building. I am a fan of, streamlining government services. As long as I've been in office, I've talked about building a government that works for people. And when you have to do anything in business and talk to three different departments at different levels of government, and probably a fourth and fifth that you didn't even know existed, that just makes it really hard to navigate. And I think that there have been efforts in that direction in the housing space that I've been really glad to see.
Yeah, no doubt about it that the wetlands issue is one that was a bit of a fitness test, if you will, of how far are we going to go. And
Right.
it's a legitimate question, though, in terms of where we build. No, your position that it is not exclusively a matter of building more is well heard. And to that end, it kind of ties into things like the Millionaires Tax or the Taylor Swift tax. And generally speaking, what's wrong with Rhode Island's taxation policy right now that exacerbates the affordability crisis?
Yeah, I mean, I think we are, it's funny because I'll do my taxes and then I'm like, that's all that I owe to Rhode Island. And nobody wants to pay taxes, right? Taxes are not cool. Nobody wants to pay them, but really it is the cost of existing and surviving in a functional society. And I think, there have been a series of austerity measures in Rhode Island for decades, quite frankly, where we're just the tax structure that we have here is very out of balance. And so when we're balancing our budget on these obnoxious little nitpicky fees here and there that really are setting up lower income folks and lower smaller businesses to bear the burden and to bear the brunt. I think that's problematic. So I would really like us to see. I'm glad to see some level of the millionaires tax come in, even as a phased in amount. But I think some of the history of taxation and how that has shifted in our state isn't really understand and appreciated. So looking forward to trying to reverse some of that austerity approach that we've had in the state for far too long.
Yeah. It's interesting to hear people talk about small business development. And then the first thing that I'm hearing from not everybody, but from some of these groups or people is, well, if you do a millionaire's tax or if you do whatever, any large scale tax the rich measure, well, it's going to drive people out of Rhode Island. Okay, but what is not looked at enough is that that can supplant some of the fees and some of the things that you just raised right there, which actually impact a lot of people who may be entrepreneurial, but there is a legitimate impediment to just basic self-starter, never mind small businesses or even medium-sized businesses. So do you think that there's a lane where this kind of pro-business movement in Rhode Island that we're seeing manifest politically this year, in fact, in some cases challenging many of your colleagues, this league of businesses, they're really a MAGA group, but they're trying to portray themselves as pro-business. But on a business level, do you think there's grounds to say, hey, we need these taxes, but we can make cuts in other places?
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And it's funny because I agree with your assessment there. And I, for a long time, had my own business as well here in Rhode Island. And so, I have helped advise other small businesses on how they operate and how to navigate, the state systems and things like that. So I think at the end of the day, the biggest thing is that people want to feel like they're getting a value for what they are paying for. That's true in the private market and it's true for taxes. And I think a lot of people that I talk to, they feel like they don't get the value. And I think that's where that austerity mindset becomes problematic because once you're boiling government down so it's small enough to drown in a bathtub, you're also not able to provide services in any way, shape, or form that people are recognizing a value for what they're paying. So I think that that's something hopefully that can get addressed as we continue to look at millionaires tax, Taylor Swift tax, and talk about the revenue raised. But I am sensitive and appreciate the concern that people have of, well, you just got all of this extra revenue. You shouldn't just add $1 billion to the budget. Um, but I will say the kind of challenge as well that we're dealing on the state level is that so many services that were handled by the federal government are being gutted and have been gutted and are going to be phased out because of federal government policies. And if you folks understood that probably about a third of Rhode Island's budget and revenue comes from federal sources. And so to lose that or any serious amount of that becomes a problem for us on a state level. And that's truly not something that we can backfill using state taxes, but it's something that we have to be mindful of because it could leave our vulnerable populations as well as small businesses and pretty much everybody in the lurch in ways that they're not even realizing just yet.
That's right. And it's a conversation that there's no rainy day fund in probably any government anywhere that can make up for a third of a budget being obviously it wouldn't be a third of a budget that would be slashed, but significant components of a third of a budget. So it's a huge factor that has to be assessed. Speaking of assessment,
Well,
you're
actually,
oh, please.
sorry, if I could just add
Mhm.
something too. One of the things, because I have talked to a lot of businesses over my time, and I've also studied a lot of places and policy. One of the things that businesses often talk about, if you're talking about larger businesses and where they want to locate, they care about housing, transportation, education. And so it is really important that as a state government, we're looking at how to meet those needs as well so that we can be an attractive place for some of those larger anchor businesses to come as well. And I'd rather us invest money in that approach for economic development as opposed to some one-off tax incentive deals, which is typically what our approach has been in the past.
Yeah, and doesn't seem to even be working right now in
Right.
terms of the major corporations that have left.
That's right.
What do you make of Inspector General fever here? I mean, come on. John Laughlin puts in this convoluted idea. We're going to have it in the lieutenant governor's office. Then the speaker puts in an idea. It's obviously there's separation of powers issues. It's modeled after Delaware. That's a brand new thing. That guy in Delaware was literally sworn in May 5th or something like that. So is the only way to do this to have a constitutional convention and have an independent appointed officer? Otherwise, just don't do it? Or am I missing something here that there is a value to a legislatively enacted inspector general that doesn't oversee the legislative branch? And then what? Are we going to have John Laughlin's going to have one that looks over you guys? And it seems like it's become convoluted quickly. Is that fair?
Yeah, I think that that's fair. And also, um, I think though the thing that I appreciate about that is that at least it's being taken seriously, that additional proposals are being offered. So I do think that I am somebody who's long supported, and in fact, I believe when Dennis Algier was in office, fact check me on this, but I believe I've co-sponsored efforts at Inspector General during my time in service. I've certainly spoken in favor of it, but I do think that it should be all inclusive, and I think the fact that it's being taken seriously enough that people are offering their own pathways and their own ideas about how it should be structured, I think is actually a good thing and shows progress on the issue and the idea, even though it's probably, a little bit away from being enacted. But I do think Inspector General should cover all branches of government. And so if it takes a constitutional amendment to do that, then we should do that.
Yeah. And it just feels like it is a job for Steve O'Donnell more than somebody
Mhm.
that gets appointed like through a political connection. And that sounds disparaging
Mhm.
of the political process. I don't mean it that way. I feel like from a transparency standpoint, Rhode Islanders are going to say, if we're going to have this, we want it to be as independent and have as much investigative experience as possible. Otherwise, it's going to become a subject on WPRO and on Twitter, and then that's going to seep out further and further. That's just my take on it. If you're going to do it right and get the right person in there.
Yeah, no, I think that that's totally a fair assessment. And I mean, to my part, to be self-critical, I think that us in the General Assembly in our role that we could make more use of the oversight committee, that process to look at separation of powers. That's why we're there, and we do have an oversight committee. But I don't think we've utilized that enough, and I think that criticism of us is fair.
Yeah.
I th- I will say it is challenging as a part-time body to oversee a branch that is not only full-time but has many many full-time aspects, but I think that there's more there that we could be doing, so
Last question here, or actually, two more questions, if I may, if you have time. First of all, um, attorney general race. You got four candidates, all of
Yeah.
whom are qualified, all of whom are quality people in our community, all of whom could do a great job as attorney general, is my assessment. But you've got nobody who has exceeded 9% in terms of polling numbers in the latest poll. That's WPRI and
Mm.
pardon me, not Quinnipiac, Emerson to put that poll out.
Yeah.
The You can register. You can get into this thing still. Do you have any interest in running for attorney general? You've long been rumored to be somebody who would be of state service on a constitutional office or beyond. Does that interest you?
I am interested in that office because I think it's such an important office. I give Nerona a lot of credit that he really showed the breadth of what that office could do, but I'm not going to be jumping in for this cycle. Like you said, I think we have a lot of good candidates. What I would like to see though from the candidates, I think that there's a mix of things that I'm seeing. I think that's still time, obviously. Most folks haven't paid attention to that race and don't know what's going on there. But I'd like to see more of a focus on, criminal justice reform. I think that's become really a bipartisan approach, especially recognizing this is a Democratic primary for the most part. So I do think, sorry, I don't know if you can hear my dog in the background playing with his
Oh,
toy.
great. We'll have to make sure we give a credit in the guests column.
Yeah, exactly. But I think, the focus on continuing like the criminal justice reform approach, I think, as well as combating Trump, but there's going to be a life for this office after Trump. And I think what is that office going to do in the full scope and range of their abilities? I think I'm still interested to hear from all the candidates on that approach. So,
Yeah, and certainly likewise, and we'll be hearing from them here on the podcast. And we're actually going to be doing a special forum on what each candidate would do on healthcare in this state, which is a
oh
whole. We
yes,
could go a lot of rabbit holes. Criminal justice reform, though, definitely something to include in that conversation. All right. Lastly, I'm a Newport. I love Newport. Didn't grow up there. I know I'm not allowed on the island officially because of that, but
right.
it does feel like one of my second homes, the place I live. We're just there yesterday.
Yeah.
What is going on in Newport right now that could help revive some of the feelings of community that this is an intangible, but it feels like between Airbnb,
Mm,
school populations decreasing, businesses closing, you go down Broadway, it looks a lot different than it did 6 months ago.
it really does. Yeah.
Consolidation of restaurants into, and by the way, Wally's Wieners, they make a great vegan dog. I'm not going to complain, but
Yeah.
what do we do? Is Newport going to get back the the thing that made it a world renowned destination, or is it going to become the Disneyland of Rhode Island?
Yeah, that is such a good question. And I do think that some of the efforts that have been done, quite frankly, in the housing, because I do think that displacement of so many locals from when I first ran to now, so many of my good friends and supporters have had to move out of the district because they can't afford to live here. And now the home that they used to live in is a second home, third home. So I do think that some of the work that's been happening on the level of the city council around the homestead tax exemption and registration requirements for Airbnbs. I'm hopeful that that will help kind of curb that problem a little bit. And then I also think I would like to see more investment from the city in our schools. There's a huge budget debate locally right now, and even a proposal of closing Thompson Middle School, which I find to be not the right path forward. Um, and I think we need to invest in our schools. And this goes back to, you said that the school age population is declining. The reality is we're also looking at the Coast Guard expanding, and we're looking at NOAA coming in. And so there's an opportunity for us to have more families move in. And also, more families won't make that choice if we're not investing in our schools. So,
Yeah. Your gut on regionalization, it seems like that ship has sailed for a long time. Is that a mistake that didn't go to voters?
I think that I mean, I opposed the last effort at regionalization, and the reason I did is because I didn't see how it was having a better outcome for the kids. I think that a lot of what gets talked about is monetary savings, but I talk to folks in the regionalized school districts that we have, Bristol Warren, Cherahoe, and those communities are always fighting about what the investment is and should be in the school, if each community is putting in their fair share or not. And so, I think that there's a way potentially to do regionalization that could have benefit for the kids, but for me, I'm holding out for a plan that's educational outcome focused that'll help our youth.
Well, I think you're the first person who has specifically said that in 15 conversations I've had on this
Mm.
topic over the last couple of years. And that's an
Oh,
amazing thing. I think that people have been so focused on selling this to the tax base
right.
as this is what it's and not the opening salvo that you basically put forth with taxation, which is you got to throw down if you want to. Where do you want to live? What kind of world do you want to live in? You know,
That's right. That's right.
and and that's a big difference. State
Yes.
Senator John Euer not getting in this time for Attorney General.
That's right. That's right. That's right. Yeah.
Thanks for your time.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Follow me on Instagram at Bill Bartholomew.